From the time it was released, one of the things that made Dreamweaver different from other HTML editors was its focus on managing sites, not just pages. While other editors were designed to create web pages, Dreamweaver was designed to create web sites. This focus is one of the reasons that Dreamweaver's site management tools are so powerful. In this chapter, we will discuss basic site management within Dreamweaver and some of the tools you can use to take control of your site. No matter how powerful a program's tools are, unless you understand the concepts behind them, you won't be effective when using them. That's why the first concept I want to discuss here is basic site structure. To those new to web design, the task of creating an entire website can be intimidating at first. Well, the truth of the matter is that most websites are quite simple. Websites, at their core, are simply a collection of files and folders, just like any other project on your computer. Although every website is different, some standards have emerged when structuring your site that can help keep your site organized and running smoothly. To create your website, you'll first need a folder on your hard drive to put it in. This folder is referred to as your root folder, and later, when you define your site, this is the folder that you'll point Dreamweaver to. Inside the root folder, you will structure your files and folders based on how they need to appear online. If you have a small site, for example, all your HTML files might go right into the root directory. As your sites get larger or more complex, it's not uncommon to create subdirectories to create more structure within your site. You can easily see this structure when browsing online. If we go to lynda.com, for example, and look at the podcasting page of the website, we can see that the URL is http://lynda.com/home/podcast.aspx. That means inside the root directory, there's a folder named home, and inside that folder, there's a file named podcast.aspx. In addition to structuring pages this way, most web designers will place site assets into their own folders as well. It's a good way to organize the site and make additional assets easier to find. Images, CSS, external scripts, videos, and other assets are routinely placed within their own folders. For the Explore California site, our assets will also have an underscore placed in front of the folder name. This helps to move these asset folders to the top of any directory structure and makes it easy to identify them as assets rather than mistaking them for a subdirectory. The home page of the site will sit directly within the root directory and is usually named index or default depending upon the web server's preferences. After that, how you structure and organize your site is entirely up to you. It is, however, very important to structure your site logically and plan your site structure in detail before you begin creating the files for your site. Understanding site structure is key to managing it properly. Most designers will map out or wireframe their site before creating even the first file. This will ensure that files are created in the right place, limit the amount of movement site files will undergo during the creation process, and help ensure that the site is properly organized. As you create files for the web, understanding the rules governing their naming is vitally important. If your files are not named correctly, certain pages might become inaccessible or just not work properly. Remember that web pages contain links to other web pages and assets. If file naming isn't handled correctly, your site's functionality can really suffer. Fortunately, the rules for web file naming conventions are pretty easy to follow. First, don't use any spaces in your file names. If you have a file that is longer than one word, use an underscore or hyphen to separate those words. Most web servers will allow file names with spaces, but when the link is resolved, the special character %20 is used in place of the space. This is really messy and can lead to a lot of confusion when sending links or displaying URLs. Second, shorten the file names when you can. Rather than aboutus.htm, how about just about? Shorter names are easier to remember and make URLs easier for clients to type. Next, avoid using special characters. No dollar signs, exclamation points, forward or backslashes, question marks, periods, or any other special character or punctuation. Many of these symbols are used to denote things like directory structure, URL parameters, or other meanings that you could just unwittingly trigger. Numbers are okay to use in file names, just avoid using them as the first character. Also, avoid uppercase letters if possible. Most web servers won't care, but some Unix servers are case sensitive and links could not be resolved correctly, even if spelled correctly. When using extensions, just be consistent. For non-dynamic websites, it's okay to use either .htm or .html. To avoid having to worry about it, you can set up a default extension in Dreamweaver's preferences, and Dreamweaver will resolve the extension for you. When you start working on a new project in Dreamweaver, the first thing you should do is define a site. The site management capabilities of Dreamweaver are tied directly into the site's definition. Without defining a site, Dreamweaver won't be able to resolve links, check related files, or help you manage your assets. The best part about defining sites in Dreamweaver is how simple the process is. In fact, you only need to know two things to get started. First, where the local root directory is located. Now, the local root directory is going to be the folder on your local hard drive or machine where your site is located. Second, you need to know what you want to name the site, and that's really all you need to get started. So I've got Dreamweaver opened here, and I don't have any sites defined. How do I know that? Well, if I look at the Files panel, I just see a link out to the desktop. My pull-down menu doesn't give me a listing of any sites. Now, creating a site in Dreamweaver is extremely easy, and there are a lot of different locations for us to do that. First, we could go up to the menu, we could go to Site and choose New Site, so that's one location. Next, we could come to our application toolbar, to our site management, and we could choose New Site there as well. We also have the ability on the Files panel to create a new site. So if I grab the pull-down menu here, notice that one of my options is Manage Sites, where I could choose a new site option. Probably the easiest way to define a new site is right here on the welcome screen. So right down here where it says Create New, we could choose Create New Dreamweaver Site. I'm going to go ahead and click that. Any of those options will give us the exact same dialog box, which is the Site Setup dialog box. Now, this has been simplified a little bit from previous versions. So if you're used to using Dreamweaver and you've used other versions of it before, this is going to look a little different. Well, they've streamlined the process and they've made it a lot easier. So I'm a big fan of this new site dialog box. The first thing I'm going to do is name my site. And I'm going to go ahead and name it Explore California, because that is the site that we're going to be working on. The next thing Dreamweaver wants to know is, hey, where is your local site folder? Now remember, this is going to be the root folder on my computer or a local network. Wherever I'm going to be doing my local development, that's what I need to point this to. So I'm able to just go ahead and click the folder icon to browse for that particular site. Now, if you're working with the exercise files like I am, I've copied them over to my desktop. So I'm going to go to my desktop, find my exercise files and open that up. I'm going to open up the Chapter 3 folder and go to 0303. That's the current movie that we're on. And I'm just going to open that up and hit the Select button. Now, on the Mac, it'll say Choose. On the PC, it'll say Select, but they mean exactly the same thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and select. Now, believe it or not, that is all I need in Dreamweaver to define a local site. Now, there's more information, surely, that we can fill out. If you'll notice, we have a set of categories over here on the left-hand side. Servers gives us an opportunity to add remote servers. These could be testing servers, production servers, or live web servers. Now, we'll cover how to set those up a little bit later on in this title, but you'll do it in the exact same dialog box. We also have version control. If you're using a product like Subversion, for example, to do version control throughout your site, that's where you would go to set those settings up. We also have an advanced settings area where we can choose more information like a default images directory, resolve links, choose cloaking to choose which files get uploaded and which files don't. There's a lot of extra information there. But again, that's not what you need in order to define your first site. You only need those two things. Now, we'll talk about most of these settings a little bit later on. I'm going to go back to my initial site setup dialog box and choose Save. What Dreamweaver will do now is it'll cache up the site. It'll happen a little quicker for some sites. For larger sites, that may take a little bit longer. But now over in the Files panel, I can see there's my Explore California site. Now, if I define multiple sites within Dreamweaver, I can use this pull-down menu to switch between one site and the next. But right now, I simply have the single Explore California website defined. You'll also notice, and I'm just going to move this panel up a little bit, you'll notice that I'm seeing the files and folders within that particular directory that we defined when we created the site. So as you can see, defining a site in Dreamweaver is an easy but extremely necessary step required for the start of any new project. You can give Dreamweaver all the site information at the very beginning of the project, or you can do what we just did, wait and define things like remote information at a later date. That's especially helpful if you don't have those settings when you're first starting out with your new site. Just be sure to make defining a site the first step in any new Dreamweaver project. If there's one constant in this world, it's that things change, and it's not uncommon to need to add or modify the information of a site as you work on it. It's also not uncommon to have your files panel crowded with older sites that are archived or no longer current projects. To deal with these types of situations, you'll need to understand a little bit about site management in Dreamweaver. Managing your sites in Dreamweaver is extremely easy, and all the information is right there at your fingertips. We're going to examine a few ways to access the Site Management dialog box, take a look at its capabilities, and then talk about what we can do when we edit our sites. To access Site Management, one of the easiest ways is to use the menu. So if I go up to the menu and I go to Site, we'll notice that we have the option to manage our sites. We can also find that in the Application toolbar. So if I go right over to the Application toolbar, grab the pull-down menu, you'll also see Manage Sites there. The Files panel gives us another option. So if we go to our Files panel and grab the pull-down menu, you'll notice that down there at the very bottom, we have a link for managing our sites. So whichever way you want to access that is fine. It'll open up the exact same dialog box. Now, when you open up the Manage Sites dialog box, you're going to see a listing of all the sites you have currently defined within Dreamweaver. At this junction, I only have a single site, but it's not uncommon to see an entire list of sites there depending upon exactly what you're working on. Now, we have a lot of options for these sites. Notice that we can create a new site, we can edit an existing one, we can duplicate it, we can remove it entirely. So if it's an old site, you've archived it, you're not working on it anymore, you can remove it from your definitions. And then we have these two very interesting options here, export and import. If you're moving from one machine to another, this is a really nice way of working. You can export out your site definition and then import that site definition. As long as your root directory remains in the same place, Dreamweaver is going to pull in all that information and keep everything constant. Now let's say you want to edit a site. I'm going to select my Explore California site and click the Edit button. Now this is going to bring the Site Setup dialog box back up again. So this is the exact same dialog box that we saw when we defined this site. Now, let's say at this point we want to change some information or add some information to it, because when we defined the site, we really only gave it a name and pointed it to the local root folder. So I'm going to click on the Advanced Settings category over here on the left-hand side. And there are a couple of things that we can do here. The first thing, for example, is to define where the default images folder is. You want to do that because if Dreamweaver ever has to create graphics for you based on some widgets that you place on the page, for example, or some of the other objects that you can place on the page, Dreamweaver now knows where to place those images. So I'm just going to click my browse icon. It'll go right into my root directory, and I can find the images directory. I'm going to double click that, and I'll hit the select button. Again, on the Mac, that button will say choose. I can also choose whether I want to make my links document or site root relative. We'll talk more about that in the chapter on links. For right now, I'm just going to leave it as document relative. We can also set a web URL, and for our website, I'm going to type in www.explorercalifornia.org. That's going to be the URL of our website when we're finished with it and ready to upload it online. If you don't have that information yet, it's okay to leave that blank. That's just going to help us resolve any absolute links that we might add to our site later on. Now, let's talk briefly about some of the other categories in the advanced settings here on the left-hand side. We have cloaking, and you can use cloaking to hide certain file types when you upload your site so that your Photoshop files, for example, or your Word documents don't get uploaded to the web server. We have design notes that allow us to work in a collaborative environment with other team members. We can pass notes back and forth to each other through our pages. And below file view columns, we have Contribute, Templates, and Spry. Now, these are fairly proprietary. Contribute, for example, is a companion product to Dreamweaver and allows you to edit your sites through the Contribute client. This would allow you to manage those settings and is really only applicable if you're using that product. We also have options for our templates, and we can also tell Dreamweaver exactly where to place any Spry assets, such as external JavaScript and CSS files necessary for any Spry widgets we add to our site. So yeah, there's a lot of information there. Well, once you're done making your changes, we're just going to click Save, and it's going to recache our site, and we can click Done, and we're finished with our editing process. Now, if you're looking for a faster way to bring that dialog box back up, you don't have to go through all those menu structures that I showed you earlier. In fact, you can go right over to your Files panel, find the name of your site, and simply double-click it. That's a very quick and easy way to access the Site Setup dialog box, and I think, like me, that's probably what you'll do most frequently. I'm just going to hit Cancel because we're not going to make any additional edits. Now, chances are you won't need to do a lot of work managing your sites, but knowing that Dreamweaver makes any changes you need to make to your site definitions quick and easy allows you not to worry about updating your site and concentrate instead on creating your content. If you're like me, when you work on a site, you're constantly creating new files and folders, renaming files, and moving files around within your directory structure. Now, let's face it. No matter how well you plan your site, chances are you're going to modify the directory structure at one time or another. To make these kinds of changes to your site, I strongly recommend using the Files panel. The Files panel can be used to create new files and folders, rename files, move files and folders, copy and paste files, you name it. Now, the Files panel is part of almost every single workspace, but it's available in the Windows menu. So you can just go to Window and choose Files if for any reason it closes. You'll also notice that the hotkey for it is F8. Now, for our Files panel, for this lesson, what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this out a little bit. You can grab the dividing line if you have a file open, but right there, just going to expand this out a little bit more. You can see there's a lot more information out here to the side, but it also allows me to change these dividers so that I can read the file name a little bit better, or maybe choose what type of file it is. So you've got the option to change these columns any way that you want. I'm just going to make my file panel a little bit beefier for what we're doing here. Now, I recommend using the Files panel because not only is it the most efficient way to make these changes within your site, it's also the safest way to do it as well. Websites, by their very nature, rely on understanding where other files are. When you place an image on the page or link to another file, Dreamweaver places code on your page that tells the browser where it can find that particular file to resolve the link or display the image. If you move a file and don't update the links to it, those links will no longer work. Or in the case of an image, the image will no longer display. That's especially problematic for larger sites where dozens of pages might link to a single page. Making all those changes manually would take considerable time. But if you remember to use the Files panel to make these changes, Dreamweaver will automatically update all the links on that page as well as any pages in your site that link to it. Let's take a closer look at using the Files panel. So one of the cool things that the Files panel can do for us is create new pages and new folders directly from within the Files panel itself. Let me show you what I mean. If I go up to the root folder, which is at the very top of your directory listing, and right-click, notice that my top two options are New File and New Folder. Let's say I create a new file. I get an untitled .html file down here. Well, I'm just going to call it test. It's a totally empty file. If I double-click it, for example, you'll notice that it's a brand new document, nothing on the page. And if I go to Code View, it's based on the preferences that we have for our new documents, which I'll show you guys how to set those a little bit later on. Now, in addition to creating files, you can manage them from here as well. We don't really need this page, so I can go right back to my Files panel, right-click the brand new page that we created, and I can choose Edit, Delete. Now, that is going to physically delete it off your computer, not just remove it from Dreamweaver. So anytime that you do that, remember that you're dragging that to your trash or your recycle bin. You're literally getting rid of that file. Now, let's say you need to do some basic file management like renaming a file, for example. I'm going to go over here to my Files panel, and I'm going to open up the Tours directory. Inside that, I can see that this page, tour detail _Big Sur, is a little different than the other ones. It's using camel case naming for tour detail. I want to avoid doing that just in case this is ever placed on a Unix server. I don't really want to deal with any case-sensitive links. So I'm going to click once on the file name and then once on it again. Now, if you double-click too fast, it, of course, is going to open the file. So you just want to be very careful about doing that. I'm going to click right inside that and change that to tour _detail with lowercase d. And as soon as you hit return, it's going to make that change. Watch what else it does. So I just went ahead and hit return. And now Dreamweaver is saying, hey, wait a second. There were other files linking to that page, and they're going to be linking to the old name. Do you want me to go ahead and update the links on those pages so that they reflect the name that you just gave it? Well, yes, of course I want to do that. So I'm going to click Update. And it's going to go ahead and update all those links automatically for me, and I didn't have to lift a finger. That was extremely handy. Now, I noticed looking at my directory structure here, there's one more thing I need to do. The gallery page and the join page are all part of the Explorers section. And once you start getting 2 or 3 pages that relate to a section, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and create a directory to store those in, just like we've done with tours here. So I'm going to go right back up to my Files panel, right-click the root directory, and I'm going to choose New Folder. And after New Folder, I'm going to go ahead and title this folder Explorers. Notice I used a lowercase e, and I didn't put an underscore in front of it, indicating that it is a subdirectory of the site and not an asset subdirectory as we have here. Okay, so here's my Explorer folder. It's totally empty right now. I need to add some things to it. So I'm going to choose the gallery page, and I'm going to hold my Control key down, that'd be the Command key on the Mac, and select a Join page as well, so that I'm selecting those non-contiguous pages. I'm going to go ahead and grab those and move them into my brand new Explorers directory. Once again, when I do this, Dreamweaver is going to say, wait a second. When you move those, all the pages that link to that, and indeed the links on those pages, are no longer being resolved correctly because now they have to go inside a folder to find it, and now any links from those pages have to go outside of the folder to find those. So Dreamweaver offers me the opportunity to go ahead and fix all of those problems site-wide right now. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and choose Update. Now, why would you choose Don't Update? Well, sometimes you might be moving a file or a folder around that uses a different type of link, for example, a site root relative link. Or maybe you're just moving assets and you don't need Dreamweaver to update it for you. So sometimes that is a viable option, although in this case, we definitely want to choose Update. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Update. Now it's going to go ahead and fix all that for me. Now I have a subdirectory, gallery, and joiner inside that, and now all the links to those files will work, and the links coming out of those files will work as well. So as you can see, the Files panel can save you a tremendous amount of time when managing your files and folders, as well as save you from making costly mistakes. Of course, that's not all the Files panel can do. Later in this title, we'll discuss using the Files panel to upload files and manage site synchronization. For now, however, concentrate on making sure that you practice discipline when needing to make changes on your site. Make those changes from within Dreamweaver using the Files panel, and you'll be confident of making those changes correctly. As a web designer, one of the toughest things to learn is that your design is always at the mercy of the user's browsers. Your site's visitors have a lot of browsers to choose from, like Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari, Opera, and Google's Chrome. Knowing that so many different browsers will render your pages, it's always a smart idea to test them in as many browsers as you can. This can prevent rendering errors from one browser to the next and help you ensure a consistent experience for all visitors to your site. Dreamweaver allows you to set up multiple browsers for testing and also gives you an internal testing environment using LiveView. So here I have our index page open, and I want to talk about using LiveView first. Now, LiveView uses the integrated WebKit rendering engine directly inside of Dreamweaver. WebKit is an open source browser rendering engine used to power such browsers as Google's Chrome and Apple's Safari browser. So if I click on the LiveView icon, what that's going to do is it's going to take my page, render it using WebKit, and preview it in the design view. So this is almost like previewing it in a browser directly within Dreamweaver, and it's a really nice feature. But it still doesn't replace actually testing within the browser itself. To do that, we have a couple of options. First, on the document toolbar, we have this little planet icon here that allows us to preview in any browser that we've set up. You can see currently, I really only have Firefox and Internet Explorer set up. Certainly, there are more browsers than that, and really any browser that you have installed on your system, you can go ahead and add to that list. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do that. You'll notice that we have a link right here that says Edit Browser List. That's probably the quickest and fastest way to get there. But you could also go through Dreamweaver's Preferences. So if I go up to the menu and I go to Edit and choose Preferences. Now on the Mac, you'll go to Dreamweaver and choose Preferences. I notice that right down to my category list, here's Preview in Browser. This actually gives me more options than just adding new browsers, but that's the first thing I want to do. I want to add Google's Chrome browser. Now, for you guys following along at home, if you don't have Google's Chrome, you could just go download it and install it, or the same thing for Apple's Safari's browser, or really any browser you want. It doesn't matter which browser you're using. All that's required is that it's installed on your system. So I'm going to click the plus symbol right here to add a new browser, and I'm just going to call it Chrome. And I'm going to browse for it. Now, Google makes us work for this one. Instead of being in the program files where we would normally find this, I'm going to have to browse. So I need to browse up to my username, James Williamson, and I'll find a folder called Application Data. Now, if you're using Windows, that may be hidden from you. You're going to have to go find that. And this, of course, is only if you're using Google Chrome. I'm going to go into Application Data, Local, Google, Chrome, Application, and there it is. For the engineers at Google, thank you for putting it there on the hard drive rather than the program files. I'm going to go ahead and click Open. And notice that I can make this my primary or my secondary browser. I'm going to click OK, but I want to talk about that for a moment. With your browser listings here, you can have primary and secondary browsers. Really, all that does for you is assign hotkeys. Notice, for example, that Firefox has the hotkey of F12. And if I wanted to make Chrome, for example, my secondary browser, now that would be Control F12 or Command F12 on the Mac. Now, we do have an option to preview using a temporary file, but that really is only something you need to worry about if you're working with dynamic files like PHP or Cold Fusion-based files. For static HTML files, you never have to worry about that particular option. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And now if I go up to my preview, debug, and browser listing, there's Chrome. So I could choose to preview it in Chrome. There's my index page in Chrome. Or I could come back and choose preview in Firefox. It's going to open it up in Firefox. Of course, remember, you did assign those hotkeys. So if I just go back into Dreamweaver and press F12, it's going to automatically launch the current page that I'm working on in Firefox for me. So that's pretty cool. Now, previewing your pages as you're working on them, that's going to help you prevent small errors from becoming bigger errors later on and help ensure a consistent experience for all your users. Adobe does have one more trick up its sleeve for previewing your pages. You may have noticed in this listing that we also have this option to preview in Adobe Browser Lab. Browser Lab is a new online service by Adobe that allows you to test your pages in multiple browsers at once. And it's great for testing across multiple platforms and browsers you may not have access to. It's a more robust feature, and it's one that we're going to explore later on in its own movie. After defining your site, the next logical step in creating websites is to begin creating new web pages. As a common task, Dreamweaver has many different ways to create new pages. Some are designed to be fast and result in a new page based on your default document preferences. Others require more manual input but give you a wider array of options regarding your new document. In this movie, we'll explore Dreamweaver's new document creation capabilities so that you can make sure the pages you are creating are conforming to the standards required for your site. Now, one of the easiest ways to create a brand new page in Dreamweaver is just to use the welcome screen. This middle column right here gives us an option of creating an array of different page types. Let's say we want a new HTML page. We're a single click away from getting that. So I'm going to say create new HTML, and there is my brand new page. You'll notice that there really isn't anything there except for some basic structure, but we have a brand new page that we've created that we can begin adding content to. Now, I'm not going to save that. I'm just going to go ahead and close it out and cover some of the other ways that we can create new pages in Dreamweaver as well. If we go over to the Files panel, I can right-click our root directory, and one of the first options is New File. I can go ahead and click on that. And this time, instead of just opening up that page, what happens is we get a brand new page over in our Files panel, and we get an opportunity to name that file. So I'm just going to go ahead and name it index.html. Now, you'll notice that it didn't ask us to choose the extension. It went ahead and placed the .html on there for us. Well, that had everything to do with our new document preferences, and we're going to explore how to set those a little bit later on. So now we have a brand new blank page named index.html, and that didn't require us to open up a page and then save it. So that might be a little faster. Now, you'll notice that both of those options didn't really give us any chances to customize this page or change any of the settings. It just opened up a brand new page. So what do you do if you need a little bit more control? Well, let's go up to the menu and let's go to File and choose New. Now, this gives us a much larger dialog box. Now, this can be a little intimidating at first, so let's just take it a bit at a time. We're going to start on the left-hand side and take a look at some of the options here. Notice that we can open up a blank page, choose a blank template, which would create a new template for us, create a new page from template. So in this case, if your site already had some templates created, you could generate a new page based off those templates. We also have sample pages in Dreamweaver that you could build pages off of. Now, don't think of these so much as starter pages, more of just sort of a default style sheet that's already created with some elements on the page. And we have this very curious other category. Now, this allows you to create some pretty interesting page types. If you're programming C#, for example, or writing some ActionScript remote files, you can do that directly in Dreamweaver by creating those page types. So that's pretty cool. Now, I'm going to go back to blank page, and then I notice in the second column that I can choose which type of page, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP. We have a lot of different page types available to us here. Now we're going to stick with HTML, and then that moves us to the third column where we have choices for our layout. Now, if you're brand new to CSS, or if you're just looking for a way to sort of speed up creating page layouts, this is a nice way to go because we have choices of 1 column, 2 column, and 3 column page designs. So if you click on one of those categories, you can actually see a preview of what that page layout is going to look like. Now, we're going to talk about these CSS starter pages in more detail a little later on. So for right now, I'm just going to choose none for layout. Now, some people don't pay a whole lot of attention to what's available to us in the fourth column, but it's probably the most important choice that we're making. Notice that down here in the lower right-hand corner, we have a pull-down menu for doc type declaration. Now, if you're new to web design, you're probably unfamiliar with the term doc type. So if I grab that pull-down menu, notice that we can assign a document type declaration spanning all the way from HTML 4.0 through XHTML to HTML5. So what does the document type declaration do for you anyway? Well, it's a line of code at the very top of your page that essentially tells whatever user agent you're using what type of code to expect. That way, it knows the rules for your code, and it's going to make sure that it displays it correctly based on correct formatting. Now, the most common document type declaration at the moment is XHTML 1.0 transitional, although we are trending to an HTML5 document standard, so it's really nice to see Dreamweaver CS5 supporting that. So I'm just going to choose XHTML 1.0 transitional. Now, there is one more option that we can choose here. If you're working with a site that's already been established, you may already have external style sheets that you're going to be using for your site. You could use this link to quickly attach that style sheet to your page before you actually put content on it. So it's a nice way of saving a little bit of time. I'm just going to go ahead and hit create. Now we have a brand new page, and if I switch over to code view, I can see there's the document type declaration that we chose when we created our new file. So now that we understand all the different methods of creating new files in Dreamweaver and the choices that we're presented with, we're going to explore setting those choices as preferences for any new documents in our next movie. Based on the method used for creating new documents, Dreamweaver often makes a lot of the key decisions for you as it creates a new page. Whenever starting a new project, or when page requirements in your site changes, it's a good idea to take a few moments to set up your new document preferences so that Dreamweaver will create new pages to the proper specification. So to find our new document preferences, we're going to open up Dreamweaver's Preferences. Now on the PC, you can find this under Edit, Preferences, and on the Mac, you'll go to Dreamweaver Preferences. And from the categories on the left-hand side, just go to our new document preferences. Now there aren't very many options here, but the options that we have are extremely important. One of the first options we see is Default Document. And if you happen to work on a different type of site, such as a dynamic site, for example, you could choose PHP or Cold Fusion. We're going to stick with HTML because we're going to be creating static HTML documents for our Explorer California site. The next choice is Default Extension. You'll notice that currently it's set to .html. Now, there's nothing wrong with .html versus .htm, but I really prefer to do .htm for my sites, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the L and just leave it as .htm. We can also choose a default document type. So if you've decided that you're going to work with HTML 4.0 transitional or HTML5, you could choose one of those and the proper document type declaration will be added. For Explorer California, we're going to use XHTML 1.0 transitional, which is pretty much the most common document type declaration used. Now, we also have some choices below that probably won't be used quite as much. For example, our default encoding is Unicode UTF-8, and really the only time you're going to need to change that is if you're working in a foreign language site such as Kanji or Cantonese or something that requires a different encoding. Now, the only other option that you're probably going to want to set is right down here we have a little checkbox that says Show New Document dialog box on Control-N. So Control or Command-N is the keyboard shortcut to create a new page. If you leave that checked, every time you hit the keyboard shortcut, you're going to get the New Document dialog box, which gives you all of those choices and options for creating a new document. If you'd rather just go ahead and quickly create a new document based on the preferences that you've set here, you could uncheck that checkbox. So now with that deselected, if I click OK, now if I choose Control or Command-N, I get a brand new document based off of those specifications, and that's a very quick and easy way to get a new document if you don't need to go through all of those options that the new document dialog box provides us. So setting these preferences at the start of a project will really speed up new document creation by having Dreamweaver create new documents that fit your specifications without requiring your input. When you switch projects or change standards, it's equally as easy to make a few minor preference changes to ensure that Dreamweaver is creating documents the way you need it to. Before starting any new project, there are a few settings that you want to review and set. They're going to be specific to that site. None of those settings are as potentially important as accessibility. In simple terms, accessibility refers to how your site's content is accessed by all users. It's easy to get in the mindset of designing specifically for browsers, but the truth of the matter is that browsers are only one of the client types potentially accessing your site's content. Mobile devices, Tablets and screen readers are just a few of the devices that can access your content. While it's obviously a good idea to provide your content to everyone who tries to access it, in some cases, it's also the law. Section 508 of the Americans with Disabilities Act states that any website paid for with federal funds needs to meet standard accessibility guidelines. Now, the good news is that making your content accessible isn't difficult. It just requires your attention throughout the design process. To make it even easier for you, Dreamweaver has many built-in preferences that assist you in making your documents accessible. In this movie, we're going to take a quick look at setting your accessibility preferences in Dreamweaver to automate many of the accessibility-related tasks for your site. So we're going to go back to our preferences. So I'm just going to go up to Edit and choose Preferences. On the Mac, you'd go to Dreamweaver and choose Preferences. And I want to click on the Accessibility category right up here towards the top. You can see it's not many choices. As a matter of fact, we basically just have check boxes that tell Dreamweaver, yes, go ahead and show me the accessibility attributes when I'm inserting any type of a form object, frame, any type of a media object such as video, or any images on the page. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave the default settings, which is actually all of those guys checked, and I'm going to click OK. And I'm just going to scroll down a little bit further down the page and click right after our last paragraph. I'm going to go ahead and insert an image on the page. There are a lot of different ways to do that, but one of the easiest is just to come up to our common objects in the Insert panel. I'm going to choose Insert Image, and then I'm going to browse to my Images directory. So let's say we want to place an image on the page. Let's say this beachyoga.jpg. So I'm going to click OK, but notice before I see the image on the page, Dreamweaver is going to bring up the accessibility attributes for that image. One of the things it would like to know is what alternate text would I like for that image. So I could type in something such as beach yoga, and that's going to help me meet accessibility requirements for that image. Now, if those are turned off, I'm going to go ahead and delete the image, go back to my preferences, and turn that off. Now, again, if I want to insert that image on the page, this time when I click OK, I get no dialog box or no warning whatsoever. Now, it's incredibly important that all of your images have what's called alternative or alt text. So we want to alt tag all of our images so that we're meeting those accessibility requirements. Alt text is the text that the screen reader will use or that browsers will show as alternate text if images aren't read by that particular user client. So they're really important for us to do, but you might say to yourself, well, you know what, I don't really need that prompt. I'll go back and do it. Trust me, this is the voice of experience talking here. You don't always go back and do that. So yes, I could simply click on the image, go to my properties, and type in beach yoga. But likely, you're not going to be doing that for every image you place on the page. So there's no good reason to ever turn those preferences off. So again, you might just want to double check that. Make sure that all of your accessibility preferences are turned on. And now anytime you insert an object on the page that Dreamweaver can assist you with, it's going to do that based on those preferences. Now, for the most part, the accessibility preferences are the type of preferences you just set and forget. You let Dreamweaver prompt you for any necessary accessibility information. I can't think of a compelling reason ever to turn them off, unless you just don't like being prompted for certain information. Now, I also want to stress very clearly that while these settings will save you tons of time and potential errors, they do not guarantee that your site will meet accessibility requirements. You should look at these settings more of as a way to save some time. The responsibility to create accessible sites is still your own, and there are accessibility requirements that are not met by these preferences. I recommend visiting the government's website on Section 508, www.section508.gov, to learn more about accessibility and how to ensure your site meets those requirements. I would also like to mention that I will continue to focus on accessibility throughout this title. As we discuss images, forms, tables, and other page elements, we will discuss their accessibility requirements and any assistance Dreamweaver can give you in ensuring the elements are accessible. There are going to be times when creating a new page from scratch is simply not your best option. If you are new to using CSS for layout, or you're simply looking for a head start for the structure and layout of your new files, Dreamweaver's starter pages offer over a dozen standards-compliant, cross-browser compatible layouts to choose from. These layouts render consistently in Internet Explorer for Windows versions 5 through 8, Firefox for Mac and Windows versions 1 through 3, Opera versions 8 and 9 for both Mac and Windows, and Safari 2 through 4. really any browser out there. They're fantastic layouts, and they're designed to be cross-browser compatible. All right, so where do we find these? Well, to access your new pages, just go to the New Document dialog box. When selecting a new blank page, the starter pages appear in the Layout panel, offering choices based off of 1, 2, and 3-column layouts. Now, when you're creating a new page using one of the starter pages, let's say that we use this 2-column fixed left sidebar, header, and footer. Now, when you choose one of those, Dreamweaver allows you to create a new external style sheet, add the layout styles to an existing style sheet, or embed the styles in a new page. And we'll do that right down here in this lower right-hand corner. So notice that it's asking us, hey, what do you want to do with the CSS for this layout? We can add them to the head of the new document that we're creating. We can create a brand new file, or we can link to an existing file. So if you already have an external CSS file, you could go ahead and place these styles directly in that file as well, which is pretty cool. Now, for what we're doing here, we're just going to add it to the head of our document. If you already have an existing CSS file that might control something else, say typography, you're free to go ahead and attach that to the page as well at this point, which is pretty cool. Now, which option you'll choose will depend upon your larger CSS strategy. The CSS created is layout only, well commented, and easy to customize for your own uses. So I'm going to go ahead and create the page. Now, as you can see, placeholder information and neutral background colors clearly mark content areas and are simple enough to easily replace with your own content. In fact, most regions have instructions on how to either control the CSS or which content should go where, so they're really, really easy to use. Now, I'm going to switch over to Code View because I want to take a closer look at the CSS itself. Now, if you want to examine how the layout works, go into Code View and check out the CSS. I'm going to scroll down until I find it. There it is. Now, the CSS is fully commented with clear, concise descriptions of how the page structure, class structure, and layout styles work. Additional comments point out properties and styles focused on creating web standards compliant code. All this is great information for those learning how to control layouts with CSS. Now, starter pages aren't for everyone. However, if you've never used CSS for layout before and want to make sure you're using solid, standards-compliant, cross-browser CSS, they're a great place to start. If you already have a strategy for using CSS in place, and one of the starter pages fits your layout requirements, it can save you a lot of time in the creation of your CSS, as you'll simply tweak the existing CSS to be more in line with your specific needs. Now, keep in mind that the CSS and page structure generated from starter pages is entirely customizable. You can add to, take away, and tweak the code in whatever manner you want. Just make sure to approach using starter pages with a clear strategy so that the overall implementation of them into your site is seamless. Now, in our next movie, we're going to discuss strategies for customizing starter pages and adopting them as part of your overall workflow. While starter pages can do a great job of giving new designers a head start on controlling page layout with CSS, they are, by nature, designed to be individual pages. Using the CSS within a starter page to control an entire site can be a bit of a challenge to somebody who is not familiar with CSS. In this movie, I want to show a workflow based on creating sites through starter pages. By no means is it the only way to use starter pages, nor am I suggesting that this is the preferred way of establishing site layout. It does, however, offer somebody new to web design a way to quickly establish a solid site-wide layout and introduces new designers to the concepts of controlling sites through external styles. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a brand new page using one of Dreamweaver's starter pages. So I'm going to go to File and choose New, and I'm going to choose from a blank page HTML, and I want to choose this 2-column fixed left sidebar, header, and footer. Now, unlike we did in the last movie, this time I want to change where the layout CSS is going to be located. Instead of adding it to the head of the document, I want to place it in a new external cascading style sheets file. Externalizing your CSS is a really great way of controlling your site, because now every single HTML page can link to that CSS file, and any changes that you need to make to your site's typography, layout, colors can be done by modifying a single file. So it's a really nice way of working. Okay, now I'm going to choose Create, and when I do that, because of the fact that I've told Dreamweaver to create a new file for the CSS, I'm going to be prompted to create a brand new CSS file. Now, within my 0405 folder, I'm going to create a brand new folder for my CSS. It's always a good idea to keep all of your styles in a single folder. So I'm going to name this folder _CSS. The underscore identifies it as an asset folder instead of a subdirectory, and make sure that it displays towards the top of any directory list. Now inside that, I'm going to save this file not as to-call fixed left header, which is nice and descriptive, but I just want to call it main.css. Now, you're free to name your style sheets anything you want to name them. I usually use main because, well, it's the main styles of the page, but really, you can come up with your own naming conventions. You don't have to follow what I've done here. So I'm going to choose Save, and now I have my brand new starter page. Let me switch over to Design View, and it is being driven by this external style sheet. Now, I can prove that by going over here to my CSS Styles panel, clicking on the All Styles, and sure enough, there is my external main.css. So this time, if I go into Code View, you'll notice in the head of the document, there are no styles whatsoever. They're all in this external main.css, and you can click right up here in the document toolbar, and you can see they're all now been externalized in that one file, and they're being linked to the page. Now, if you're wondering how that works, notice that here in the source code of our HTML file, on line number 6, we have this link right here that's linking to this file. Now, this is a weird link right now because it's pointing to some place on my computer instead of a document relative link. The reason for that, we haven't saved our file yet, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to File and choose Save. I'm going to save this into my root directory, and I'm going to save it as index.htm. Now, notice that that link tag resolves itself to something that's a little bit more manageable. Now, as I mentioned before, you're free to tweak these layouts and do anything you want to them. So let's say that while we agreed that this was a great place to start, maybe it wasn't exactly the layout or the color scheme that we want. So what we're going to do is make some quick changes to our CSS to affect the width of the page, maybe the width of some columns, things like that. Now, in order to do that, it's very important that you understand the structure of the page. And Dreamweaver can help you do that as well. Notice, for example, if I click inside this heading called Instructions, right down here underneath our document window, we have what is known as the tag selector. Now, if you've never used the tag selector before, I really want to encourage you to take a closer look at this. Your tag selector is going to tell you the structure of exactly the area that you're in. So, for example, by clicking in here, I see that I'm inside of an H1 tag, which is inside of a div with a class of content, which is inside another div with a class of container, which is inside the body tag. Now, if I click on Code View, I can see that very clearly. There's my div for content, there's a div for a sidebar, there's my container div, and there's my body tag. So there we were seeing the tag structure that the tag selector was telling us. Now, why is that important? Well, if you don't understand what the name or the ID or the class of that element is, you won't know which rule in your CSS to change. Now, we're going to be talking a lot more about CSS later in this title. So for right now, if some of this is confusing for you, that's okay. We'll be talking a lot more about classes, IDs, and these selectors as we go. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to change the overall width of my page. And the best way to do that is to find the top level parent tag, which in this case is the div with the class of container, and then go find the selector that drives that. So I'm going to go over to my CSS Styles panel. And there it is right there, .container. Now, if I collapse my Files panel by double-clicking on the tab, I get to see all those properties currently for my container. Notice that right now, the width is 960 pixels. Well, maybe I want it to be shorter than that. So I could click right here for the value and just type in 920 pixels. Now, when I do that, it shrinks the page size down. I also notice that I don't see my main content region anymore. Well, the reason for that is the main content region is now too wide to fit in this area. The width of the sidebar plus the width of the main content region need to add up to 920. So I'm going to go and find that content region. Once again, I'm going down the list of my selectors until I find content. I notice that the width given for this is 780 pixels. I'm going to change that to 740. There we go. My content's back again. So now we have a much narrower page that fits what we want for our site. We could continue to make changes here. For example, we could change color. We could change typography. We could change the width of the sidebar and the main content region so that the sidebar was a little wider. It's entirely up to us. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with what we've done here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a save all and close my index file. Now, once again, as I mentioned before, CSS starter pages are typically designed to be single pages. But what if we want to create an entirely new page for our site using all those modifications that we just made. Well, let's see how we would do that. So I'm going to go to File and choose New. Once again, I'm going to choose this 2-column fixed left sidebar header and footer. I can go ahead and click Create, but before I do that, I want to verify something. Notice again that the Layout CSS is saying, okay, create a new file. Well, that wouldn't be very efficient. You'd be creating a new external style sheet for every single page in your site. It's not really what you want to do. So instead of that option, I'm just going to say link to an existing file. After all, I want to use that style sheet that we just created. Now, when you do that, you have to go over here and tell Dreamweaver which style sheet you want to use. Some sites have multiple style sheets, so don't assume that it's just going to go ahead and pick up the style sheet that you just did. So I'm going to click that little link to browse. And again, I'm going to browse out to the 0405 CSS folder that we created earlier. Choose main.css. And that little warning that you get is just Dreamweaver saying, hey, make sure you save this file. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add that to the head of the document as a link. We'll talk more about the difference between link and import in later movies. For right now, we just want to use link. So I'll click OK, and I'll click Create. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and I'm going to save this as about.htm. Perfect. Now we're getting the proper width, and we're using the styles that we modified earlier. So we didn't have to create a whole new section of files, but because of the fact that we used the same starter page, the structure of the HTML was the same, and that means that the styles that we had earlier can drive this page. Now, if I had chosen a 1-column layout or a 3-column layout, it probably wouldn't have been as effective because those styles are designed for this particular layout. So if you're going to use a 1-column, a 2-column, and a 3-column within your site, you may need to have separate external style sheets to drive those. Now, I want to take just one last moment here and prove to you that those external styles are driving both pages. I'm going to go right over here to our CSS styles, and I'm going to choose the header selector. The header is this top region. I can see that I have a background color for that. So I'm going to highlight these hex values here, and I'm going to change it to a different color, maybe one from our Explore California site. So I'm going to choose #193742. When I return, I can see that the header is now sort of that dark blue. Now, if I do a Save All, go over to my Files panel, and open up the index file, I can see that it's using that same exact blue color. So both of those are getting their layout, their color, their typography, all of that from the external style sheet that we created when we first created our first starter page. Now, this workflow is going to allow newer web designers to quickly establish a basic page structure and an external CSS file that can be used to control the entire site. The CSS is lightweight. It can be modified as much as the site requires. It's also a great way to learn CSS, as you can experiment with the styles to see how it affects multiple pages and add rules to the CSS to control additional elements within the page. Of course, there are other ways to achieve the same results, but this is one of the quickest and easiest ways for new users to adopt. Now, one last thing. This in no way lessens the need for new designers to learn CSS as quickly as possible. CSS is used to control almost all modern websites. And without understanding how it works and how to control it, your web design skills will always be needlessly limited.